talk about mysticism and Hindu philosophy, what little I knew. And she says, come back at midnight on Wednesday and you'll have a mystical experience.
Keep watching to learn more.
Book 3 in the new Thinking Aloud dialogue series is UFOs and UAP, Are We Really Alone? Now available on Amazon.
New Thinking Aloud is presented by the California Institute for Human Science, a fully accredited university offering distant learning graduate degrees that focus on mind, body, and spirit. The topics that we cover here. We are particularly excited to announce new degrees emphasizing parapsychology and the paranormal. Visit their website at CIHS.edu. You can now download all 8 copies of the New Thinking Aloud magazine for free or order beautiful printed copies. Go to newthinkingaloud.org.
Thinking Aloud. Conversations on the leading edge of knowledge and discovery with psychologist Jeffrey Mishlove.
Hello and welcome. I'm Jeffrey Mishlove. Today we'll be exploring the role of synchronicities and meaningful coincidences in our lives. My guest is Bernard Beitman, former chair of the Psychiatry Department at the University of Missouri in Columbia. He is the author of Life-Changing Synchronicities, A Doctor's Journey of Coincidence and Serendipity, the book we will be discussing today. His other books include Meaningful Coincidences, How and Why Synchronicity and Serendipity Happen, and Connecting with Coincidence, the New Science of Using Synchronicity and Serendipity in Your Life. Bernie is based in Charlottesville, Virginia, and now I'll switch over to the internet video. Welcome, Bernie. It is a pleasure to be with you.
Thank you, Jeff. It's great to see you again.
Likewise. I'm delighted that we're going to be talking about your third book on synchronicity today because it's your most personal book. And I think for people who are trying to understand the mysteries of the paranormal and synchronicity, it's really helpful to hear a personal story. My sense is that until people have experienced it themselves, most people simply have a hard time accepting it at all.
That's right. That's right. And so this book is intended to be a reflection of experiences that people have, but haven't been able to categorize them and kind of think they're almost a little crazy sometimes, or they're weird. And I'm here to say, no, these are very common experiences. And here's a book filled with them. And if you see your mirror in some of these stories, let me know.
You cover a lot of ground because in effect, it's a biography of yourself from childhood. So you go through your childhood years, your teenage years, your college years, and your years as a professional psychiatrist. And all throughout your career, it would appear as if very significant turning points are accompanied by meaningful coincidences.
Absolutely. That's very early on. They were highly meaningful. And the biggest one, and it still kind of is when I got home one day from school when I was 8 or 9, and I was looking for my dog. I mean, this guy and I were buddies. His name was Snapper. They let me name him Snapper, which might have been a mistake. But I could say that why later. But I got home and my buddy wasn't home, and my mother was standing in the doorway of the house. She doesn't usually do that. I said, "Hey, Mom, where's Snapper?" And I haven't been able to figure out a lot of things about my mother, but why did she say, "Bernie, go to the police station, maybe they know"? I said, okay, I was a good boy. So I got back on my bike and went across the big road to the police station and climbed up the stairs and asked the big man, have you seen my dog? No, son. And I started crying a lot because I needed that guy. I needed him, and went back down the stairs, got on my bike, and because I was crying so much, I went right instead of left. So I went right, which was right, it turned out. And just about maybe 10, 15 yards, I see this dog coming towards me, and he's walking like Snapper. And it was. And the only problem with that was I thought he'd be happier to see me than he was. He jumped up on my leg and almost said, what took you so long? Well, that guy and I were such buddies, and I was a lonely, lonely boy. And I found him, and he found me. Let's put it together. He made 4 turns. I made 1 turn. That was a life-changing synchronicity for me, for a boy and his lost dog to be united in a kind of out there in the world, both of us thing. Changed my life in a very positive way because my best friend and I could hang around together for many more years afterwards.
How old were you, Bernie?
I was about 8 or 9 and still in elementary school.
If your mother hadn't told you go to the police station, and if you hadn't climbed up the stairs and met the officer there who didn't know where your dog was and walked back down the stairs crying so that you made a wrong turn, you would have missed your dog.
Right.
And that, in a way, set a pattern, which here you are now, 70 years later, still pursuing the same pattern.
How do you, I think you're right, but I hadn't thought of that, but how do you see it as the same pattern, Jeff?
Well, of course, it began by a series of meaningful coincidences, but now you've taken a meta level. You're analyzing them. You're not just having them.
Yeah, it's the meta level, and I'm so glad you say meta because I'm a meta kind of guy. I'm a metaphysician, to be accurate. I like meta, and I also like meta about meta, too. I like getting up there, too, because it's fun to watch how meta thinking operates. That gets to what I'm very interested in now as a psychotherapist, have been, and interested globally, is in our collective self-observer. Each of us has an ability to observe our own minds. Yours is fantastically good, Jeff. There's no question about it. As I observe your own mind, you're observing your mind, and I can see you observing your own mind more than I can feel it. I do that. I observe my own mind. A lot of people do, but most people don't seem to know that they have a self-observer. They haven't acknowledged its existence. They just look at the contents of their own mind. Synchronicity makes you do that if you're interested, because you have to see a pattern over here and a pattern over here that somehow aren't causally related in the usual way, and then see that they may be connected. And your self-observer is the one that observes how these patterns can match with each other or what they might mean. But you first have to observe. And one of the fun things I like to do is when, hey, what makes these meaningful coincidences happen anyway? And I say, well, some people say random, some people say God, the universe, but the real cause is you. The first cause is your psychology, your willingness to see them. That is the prime cause.
Bernie, this event that took place when you were 8 years old, and it's the event with which you begin your book, in some ways is a parallel to the event with which you end your book. It has to do with the death of your father. We were talking about it just a few minutes ago because I had a similar experience with my great Uncle Harry at the moment of his death, only my experience was a very beautiful, pleasant, dreamlike experience. Yours was very visceral. It was very physical. You felt like you were choking to death. And unbeknownst to you at that very moment, your father died choking to death 3,000 miles away.
Yeah, that kind of gets your attention, you know. My brother told me the next day, as I was choking uncontrollably at a sink in San Francisco, and he called me the next day and said our father had died at 11 p.m. San Francisco time and 3 a.m. or 2 a.m. Wilmington, Delaware time. And what I really enjoy about your story with your great uncle Harry is, yes, it too was simultaneous with his death. And again, it was miles away. Yours was 2,000, mine was 3,000. And somehow that means for each of us, you and me, and so many other people who have these shared death experiences, Raymond Moody, William Peters, studying shared death experiences, that they show something about the way we are connected to each other, particularly those we love. Because if you ask me, what made you do all this coincidence stuff? It's love. It's love of my dog and my dog's love of me, love of my father and my father's love of me. These are love of each other as what made these stories happen. And it made me interested. And that's a fundamental level of synchronicity understanding, is that they demonstrate sometimes love between people. And there also can be generalized to love among people.
I think there's another element as well, which is the crisis that took place. And I'm thinking of in the 19th century when the Society for Psychical Research did a massive study of apparitions. They determined that the single most common form of an apparition is what they called a crisis apparition, typically like with your father or my uncle Harry. They were dying. They were in crisis. And when you lost your dog, you were in crisis. You were crying. You generated a strong emotional signal. And from the point of view of, let's call it telepathy for a moment, another way of looking at synchronicities, when the sender is experiencing a very strong emotion, that tends to be more effective in telepathic sending. Just the opposite of when you're a receiver, it's better to be relaxed.
It is telepathy. It is telepathy in the old definition for the Society of Psychical Research. What they meant by telepathy was feeling at a distance. Tele, at a distance, pathy, feeling. So each of us were experiencing the original definition of telepathy, and I invented a term to rhyme with synchronicity called simulpathity. Simul, same time, pathy, feeling, at a distance feeling that is to substitute for telepathy. These are telepathic experiences, and what I love about your story with the great Uncle Harry is that you then went to your faculty at the University of California in Berkeley and said, "Hey guys, how's this happen?" And they didn't know. They didn't know.
They didn't have a clue, not a clue. They had absolutely nothing whatsoever intelligent to say.
So you decided to have something intelligent to say and got the first and only PhD in parapsychology in the United States.
All of that is true. That's how it happened. And I'm very grateful to my Uncle Harry for that, but even more grateful for giving me a glimpse of the afterlife, because it was just so exquisite. I awakened from that dreamlike experience just sobbing, crying tears of joy.
Because you knew he was still around.
Yeah.
you knew he was still around. Yeah, that's. I'm glad you emphasized that. It's. I'm pretty sure. My father arranged for me to meet the mother of my children, my wife at the time, and it was after his tombstone unveiling in Wilmington, Delaware. This was 11 months after he had died, and I went back for the tombstone unveiling. And to add another twist, my best friend from high school needed a letter from me because he had just done a little thing like burn down an ROTC building in Hawaii. So for some reason, they were after him. The FBI was after him. And he decided to turn himself in, so he needed to have a letter from some of his friends. So I met with him, and I delayed my flight because of my friend's need. Again, as you're saying, high emotion generates all this stuff. It's very true. My research shows that high emotion increases not only these telepathic experiences, but other forms of synchronicity, and including serendipity. So I got on the plane a day later than I would have, went to Dallas, assigned seats back then. We didn't pick them. On next to me is a young woman getting on at Dallas. She looks at me, has a huge watch on, asks me what time it is, which I still got a kick out of even then. And I did a tarot card reading for her with some of the decks American Airlines gave us. And we ended up going to Seattle and we getting married. And it was a wonderful way of meeting. It was like I like to say in an airplane, my father was still hovering, and his grandfather and his father and all the parents, all the grandfathers ahead of time, or before me, to have this Jewish woman marry me so that we could have a Jewish son. And we did. And that Jewish son now has a Jewish son. So I've had an obligation to continue that lineage, and that airplane meeting after my father died in the tombstone was part of how that stuff works.
How interesting, Bernie. If you don't mind, let me share with you a somewhat parallel but opposite story. After my father's funeral, I was in Wisconsin for the funeral, and flying home on the airplane, I'm thinking to myself, this is an opportunity for me to get even more deeply involved in the Jewish religion. And I was at the time. I had been away from the religion for decades, but at that time, around the time of my father's death, I was a member of the synagogue, and I was even going to minions, little religious services at 7:30 in the morning, putting on tefillin. And this is at a Reformed synagogue, no less. And so here I am thinking, oh, good, my father is dead. We're going to have regular minions. I'm going to become more involved in the Jewish religion now. And I heard my father speaking to me as clear as a bell while I'm on the airplane. And he said, son, if you want to do that, do it for yourself. Don't do it for me. I don't need it.
Wow.
And actually, that was the moment when I realized that in Jewish terms, it's called teshuvah, the return back to the religion. I realized my teshuvah had ended. I had gone back to the Jewish religion. I had completed something I needed to do inwardly, but I was finished at that point. And so that's the impact that it had on me.
That's a wonderful story. And again, it's the similarity is a feeling of communication. You got the direct word. I got the woman to in an airplane, and each of our fathers having an influence on our future direction. And for the people watching and listening to us, you've heard two parallel stories with Jeff and me. And if you read this book, the life-changing synchronicities, each of which have described life-changing synchronicities in its broader form, you may read in this book mirrors of your own mind. And many people now are telling me that this book is not about me. It is about me, but it's about us. It's about all of us and a shared experience that we all can have if you tune into it, if you allow yourself to experience them. So when you read this book, see what it reminds you of in your own life, because it probably will.
Let's talk about the difference between a synchronicity and serendipity and coincidence.
Well, meaningful coincidence is a term I've used to cover serendipity, synchronicity, seriality, and simulpathity. I can go through those. But we start with the word coincidence. What is a coincidence? A coincidence is two events coming together in a surprising and difficult to explain way that seems somehow related. So they come together, but how'd that happen? So we don't know. Oh, just a coincidence. Well, it's merely a coincidence, or it's a meaningful coincidence. It becomes meaningful when it means something to you personally, or sometimes when it tells you about how reality works, or both, because the meaning of meaning in synchronicity is, what does it mean to me? What does it mean for how this world works? How does it operate? If we can get communications from people who have died, that's a pretty new idea, at least has been. It's been around a long time, but for current ways of thinking. So that the meaningful coincidence is an umbrella term for synchronicity and serendipity. I use synchronicity because it's a more popular term. It's also got more spread in it. It's got more spiritual in it, as well as psychological, interpersonal. Serendipity is being studied in MRIs now, where they try to have serendipitous experiences for somebody in the MRI to see what happens in their brain. There is the Serendipity Society, which is composed of academics still pretty much wedded to the materialistic time frame or reality frame. So they try to explain serendipity in terms of usual ways of thinking about physics and psychology. So they don't like synchronicity because it's too weird. And the synchronicity people just want to go all over and talk about just synchronicity and serendipity. Okay, I'll call that serendipity. I'll call that synchronicity. So these are terms that are confusing, that overlap, that have to do more with people's sense of what causes them, what their world belief is, what their ontology is. And the trouble with synchronicity for a lot of people, it delivers ontological shock. And you were ontologically shocked when your father talked to you. The reality you were living was not going to be the same as you thought you were going to be living. So that's what ontological shock does. It shakes up the way you think reality works. And that's what you and I are trying to do with each of what we're doing with people is, hey, it ain't the way you think it is. And you're told it is. There's much more out there.
It certainly is the case. Well, you write about many events in your life in which happy coincidences occurred. I'll call them serendipities. And it seemed as if you were able to trigger those events, usually by doing something that you were hesitant to do, even afraid to do. But you mustered up your courage and you did it. And then things seem to happen magically.
Well, what we're doing is trying to take the magic out of there and say, like, how does it happen? And that means defining what are the variables. And high emotion is one of them. High emotion is a real driver of meaningful coincidences. But so is transition. and high emotion and transition are often related to each other. And the biggest form of stress is the death of a spouse, and how many people see signs of that spouse, flowers showing up, birds showing up, or a other loved one. Those are stressors that increase the likelihood of people seeing them. So transition, high emotion, which are related, tend to trigger them. But sometimes transition is not as highly emotional, but still is there. So they're related to each other. So what I've done a couple of times, and I think you're referring to, is that I have gone knock, knock, knock on a stranger's door. It's one of my favorite things. It started maybe when I was in high school, and my best friend in high school, mother used to get mad at me for opening their refrigerator door to see what was in there. That was the wrong thing to do. But I was curious, what's behind the green door? It's an old song. I wanted to know what was there, and so I ended up in Los Angeles after my first year in medical school. And I went to Yale, which was a remarkably wonderful medical school to go to then. They had this weird thing of giving you the summers off. The summers off. At Harvard, you had to stay there the whole time. Most places, you had to stay there during the summer. But Yale gave you not only summers off, but gave you money to go do research someplace. So I had to write a half a page thing, and I got a whole lot of $500, which was a lot of money back then, to do research at Mount Sinai Hospital in our Cedars of Lebanon, Sinai in L.A., and they divided afterwards. And I was to do research there. I had to have a place to stay, so I was on the way to L.A. from New Haven, and with this guy who needed somebody to ride with him, and I said, "Oh gosh, Rudy, man, I don't have any place to stay. I don't know where I'm going to live. Where am I going to stay?" So I called a friend of mine from college, and why I called her, we could ask. I don't know. Thank you, Rosita Sarnoff. Thank you. And Rosie said, this Bob lives in L.A., and she gave me his address and his phone number. I called him up, and he let me stay there a couple of days. And when I was staying there, he says, I'm renting this house. It was a big house near the University of Southern California in the Watts district. And that exploded while I was there. And he said, there's a woman in front who owns the house. She's a mystic. And I said, a mystic? Well, I heard about that in philosophy class in college. I've heard about mysticism. I'd like to meet her. So I trotted around the front, knocked on the door, and this gray-haired woman in her 40s or so, in a house dress, says, and I walk in. It's kind of like saying it to, have you know where my dog is? I say to her, I hear you're a mystic. And she says, you're the second one. That's the kind of mystery I didn't ask about, but you're the second one. I was the second one coming in to join her mystical order. I didn't realize that till later. So she shows me into the house. I go to the kitchen, and I see the tree of life and some Kundalini stuff and some Brahman stuff and other stuff from India. And I talk about mysticism and Hindu philosophy, what little I knew. And she says, come back at midnight on Wednesday, and you'll have a mystical experience. Hard to turn that one down for an adventuresome boy. So I showed up at midnight, and she gave me a glass of milk with a blue liquid in the bottom. And I said, "What is that?" And she said, "It's LSD." You may remember, Jeff, in Look magazine, there was an article about LSD in 1963 or 64. It was written by Andrew Weil of integrative medicine fame. And he had busted Alpert and Leary, who were giving acid to undergraduates in the Harvard Crimson. And that's another story. But I bring him up because another coincidence involved that LSD story. That I was an intern at Mount Zion Hospital in San Francisco, and I was sitting down at the intern's breakfast the first morning, which was 7:30 or 7 a.m. I didn't know where I was. That's too early for me. That was too early. So I sit down someplace, and some guy taps me on the shoulder and says, "You're sitting in my seat." I turn around, and there's this bald guy saying, "My name's Andy." And it turns out to be the Andrew Weil, who's become very famous after that. We became really good friends for a while back then. We still keep in touch. And we were assigned, again, another one of these stories, 11 or 12 interns assigned to rotations of 2 interns each. And we were assigned together, which was a 1 out of 9, a 1 out of 11 possibility that we would be paired. It's not a low probability, but it's not a high probability. So we were paired on neurology, and we had the pleasure of having one of the attendings be a guy named Roy Cocaine, Kokenge. And that was part of the fun with Andy. So
now, you're jumping around a little bit because you were at the house of this lady who had just given you LSD, and now you're in San Francisco with Andrew Weil. How much time elapsed?
Well, that was about a year, but I wanted to tell that story because I haven't done it that way before, Jeff, and I'll get back to the woman in L.A. because I know I was doing that, and you caught me, and I did it, but I confess I knew what I was doing on that one. So she gave me this LSD, which, again, I had never really known anything about. Except that maybe Look magazine thing. And
so when Andrew Weil wrote the article, had you read it at that point?
I think I saw a mention of it.
But you hadn't met him then?
No. I met Andy. Took the acid when I was a first-year medical student. It was 4 years later that I met Andy as an intern. It's 4 years later in San Francisco. So L.A., 1965. San Francisco, 1968, when I met Andy. So I got a sniff of him back then, but I didn't know about him. No.
Okay. So because you were willing to knock on the door of a perfect stranger and ask about mysticism, the following Wednesday night, you're having a mystical experience facilitated by LSD.
Yes. Yeah, I didn't know really what a mystical experience was, so it was, I don't remember what happened in the living room. There were about 4 or 5 other people there, and it was dark, of course, and it was a lot of swirling, and all I do remember was near the end of being in that living room, I had my hands together looking at energy patterns between my fingers. I could, like cat's cradle, where you could see strings between your fingers and stretch them and hold them together. But these were energy patterns. These were energy bands, and they were green and gold, which were the major colors of California in those days and still are. Green and gold. And I was looking at them, and then this young woman who was there put her hand between my fingers, and her hand was like a prow of a boat parting these rays between my hands. And that was proof to me that what I was seeing was not hallucination. It was real, because I could see the change her hand brought about. And from that, I've been very interested in the biomagnetic electric energy of our human bodies and have become very sensitive to interpersonal energy, partly on the dance floor and partly increased with trees, with nature, and then beginning to feel the vibrations that are all around us and are there to be felt and seen. Other people report these things, but I got to experience them and having the first experience of knowing them, and I've been studying them ever since because they are a form of communication which I hope human beings will in the future, the near future, utilize as part of telepathy with each other, biofield readings, and be able to visualize the movies that we are telling each other as we speak the words.
As I recall from your book, Bernie, the same lady who introduced you to LSD also taught you how to read tarot cards.
She sent me the Aleister Crowley Book of Thoth tarot cards, Xeroxed sheets. They weren't colored. When I was an intern, after Andy and I had met each other in San Francisco, and in the hills of Berkeley, in a basement off the garage, I had a lamp and studied these black and white cards. So she didn't teach me, she gave me the cards, and I looked at those cards and tried to see how the image on the card, for example, the Fool, connected with the Hebrew letter, which was Aleph, and the number, which was 0, the number of the card, and the astrological sign of the card. And that was putting those ideas together to see how they each are a piece of a bigger idea became a very good mental exercise, which allows me now to see connections among and between things that I might not have otherwise seen.
You're a professional psychiatrist, or you were for most of your professional career. It's probably more accurate to say all of your professional career. And at the same time, the kinds of things that you're reporting, interest in tarot and mysticism and taking LSD and tracking the coincidences that occur in your life, other psychiatrists might say these are psychotic symptoms.
Not might. Did.
Would and did. And still do.
Well, one of them called me psychotic. That's true. And that's still true. And I don't know how to change that. There is one psychiatrist who writes for Psychology Today sometimes on synchronicity, and he will tell you with the certainty of a fundamentalist religious person who knows God is making it all happen. He is sure it's all random. It's all random. That's the perspective Psychology Today wants, because they're rooted in a materialistic way. So he's the only one that has been able to get after me on this. And in a way, he kind of dismisses me as like irrelevant, because he knows what's right. When you know what's right, Jeff, you're unassailable.
Well, the tricky thing with synchronicities from a research point of view is that most of the time people report them after the fact, in hindsight. It's not like you ever predict in advance, I'm going to have a synchronicity at 2 p.m. tomorrow.
Ah, yes. And it's getting kind of hard. It's getting there, but Bruce Grayson's been able to do some of it to do near-death experiences. You have to get really organized and be in the intensive care unit of cardiology intensive care and have people ready. And then what he was doing was trying to get the people who are dying, who are out of their body, to read what was on top of a cabinet. Something was up there, a symbol. And I don't know what happened with that. I know he was trying to do it. They were having a lot of trouble. What the research I'm doing, and the research that many physicians have done for centuries, is collect case reports. That's what Raymond Moody did with near-death experiences. And you collect enough of them, and it becomes not anecdotal, but data. And then the data becomes something you can figure out how to do research on. The same is true with depression. You had to be able to organize. Depression became a huge field of study in psychiatry, but for a long time it wasn't very well organized in just what it was and what the different variations are. So my start as a psychiatrist is a taxonomy of meaningful coincidences, which my second book, Meaningful Coincidence, is, and then trying to increase public awareness through this book, Life-Changing Synchronicities, so that enough energy gets together to become possible to do research on synchronicity.
My wife is a public speaker and teaches courses in creativity, and she suggests to her students that you should do new things. Do something you've never done before. For example, my wife told this class, when you go home, instead of going into your house through the front door, why don't you go in through a window? And just as an example, so one of the women said, well, what if I live on the second floor? How am I going to get in through the window? My wife said, well, take a ladder. And so this woman tried it. She actually got a ladder, was climbing up to go into her apartment in the second story of her house when a policeman saw her. And
then what happened? Did she get married to the policeman?
She did. That is exactly what happened.
What do you make of my being able to say that?
Isn't that a beautiful example of a coincidence, or even more, a synchronicity or telepathy? Unless, for example, this story has been around and you've already heard it.
I haven't. I have not heard it.
Yeah.
I have not heard it. No, that came to me right away. And it could have been on the words you were saying. It could have been that you had the image in your mind of the conclusion of that movie, which is what I think happened, because I was listening very carefully to the imagery you were describing of the woman climbing the ladder to the second floor. I was there with you, and then I could fill in the last frame, which was part of that movie that I was watching in your mind.
Doing these interviews, it happens all the time where I am thinking a thought and the direction I'd like to take the interview, and I don't have to say a word because my guest just goes right there automatically. And I often wonder, is that telepathy or is it just the logical progress of our conversation?
Well, it's not either or. It's just not. But if I listen to you, Jeff, in a way that I wasn't able to before, you speak with your heart and not just your mind. And I can feel that in you. And that emotion that I can feel in your heart helps generate the emotion of my ability to tune into you, because you're open to being tuned into. And I'm, without you being able to prove it, I could see the ending of that story almost just by the openness of your communication.
You know what else, Bernie? Just a moment or two before I launched into that story, I made a remark to the effect, well, you can't predict in advance that a synchronicity is going to occur at 2:00. But you just showed that it can be done.
We didn't predict it.
No, but it happened like that.
It happened like that. And what we can do, and you are seeing it, you're experimenting with it, with your guests, you can wonder how many times, and you can keep research on it. But if you do that, you're going to lose your track. That's the trouble. When you get out of it, I had too many experiences where I'm really in the groove, and they say I'm in the groove, and I'm out of the groove. But you could have somebody else. I'm not going to try to suggest any more, but here we're seeing a repeated pattern in your experience. And so that repeated pattern could somehow be, but let's look at it. So another way of talking about the research here. Tarot cards, and particularly I Ching, are both versions of domesticated synchronicity. Jung tried to use the astrology to be able to predict stuff. You can read the data and come up with what you want, but we could do the same thing, I think, better with the I Ching. It's been around a longer time, and find people who really can interpret it. And I know somebody who talks to the I Ching gods on a regular basis who's really good. So you find people who are really good, just like you have to find extraordinary people in various other ways, and study how well her I Ching readings do. She is pretty effective. So domesticated ways of studying are right here in front of us if we want to do them.
I'm glad you brought up the I Ching. It's a wonderful example, and Carl Jung wrote the introduction to Richard Wilhelm's translation of the I Ching. For viewers who may not know, the I Ching is a Chinese form of divination. It's thousands of years old. It can involve throwing coins or yarrow sticks in the original traditional form. But Jung maintained, as I understand it, that every moment has a particular meaning. And when two events occur at the same moment, they share the quality of that moment. And so by throwing the coins at a particular moment and getting a response that you interpret using the Book of Changes, the I Ching book, Jung felt that you're tuning into a message that is locked into time itself. I wonder how you feel about that. I've talked to Orthodox Jungians who said that what that means is that it's not a real synchronicity unless it happens exactly at the right moment.
Oh man, you can get orthodox about any part of Jung. It's not a synchronicity unless it helps you individuate for some of them. I mean, they get into their rigid ways. I don't think Jung would be a Jungian these days. But what you bring up is a really important idea, that each moment has a quality. Each moment has a quality shared by everything and anything that's around it, that's in it. And that quality can be distilled into a kind of essence. And that's where you can see it with synchronicity, because we look at the meaning of synchronicity, sync together, chron, and time. That's what Jung was trying to label as synchronicity, the falling together in time. Zufallen, the German of it, falling together in time. That's what he tried to mean. It is not just simultaneous. It doesn't happen right at the same time. Well, nothing happens right at the same time. There's a little difference between them in order for you to notice it, but approximate the same time. Some synchronicities, you can get one 4 years apart. Like Roderick Mayne has one of his books of being in the same hotel and seeing the same view outside the hotel, reflecting a part of the Bible that he's working on and had been. And that's 4 years apart. So the key thing is the mind that connects these events. Mostly we stay within a narrow time frame, but they can be a broader one. So it's evolved, what we mean by sync. But the idea, Jeff, of each moment, like the moment right now with us talking, has a quality. And that quality can be mirrored in the I Ching.
You might say the same of other forms of divination, astrology, for example, or in Africa, they practice something called the Ifa, the throwing of the bones, or reading tea leaves.
Well, what do they all have in common? They got in common that in randomness, there is order. And that's a crazy thing for human beings. But what I'm writing now, Jeff, is a book that includes about how we put stuff in polarities. But they aren't polarities. If you go this way, then you're almost over here, and there's some place in between. And random, out of chaos comes order, is something we have to be able to learn to accept, enjoy, embrace, and utilize.
You know, what you're saying is extraordinarily profound, because randomness, by very definition, means there is no order. And yet you're saying, actually, there is. So it suggests that what we're talking about is a whole level beyond what we think of as physical reality. There's a non-physical level of reality. It's often equal and opposite of what we think of as the physical level, but it seems to be more causal.
We're getting meta here, Jeff, and I'm with you. I agree with you.
Well, Bernie, this has been an exciting discussion, and I'm really glad that you have opened up your own life for your readers. People can look at these many, many different synchronicities, and I was particularly fascinated by all of the athletic ones that you write about. I didn't realize that you were such an athlete as a college student.
I'm curious, now that you realize that, how does that change your view of me?
Well, I think of you, and I could be wrong because I haven't seen you in person. I see you across the video screen. I think of you as sort of a smaller person, not a particularly large guy. So to see you as a football halfback suggests to me that you have enormous power inside of that small body.
5'10", 165. That's what I was doing playing. And it was power in my thighs, but it was also a kind of cognitive thing, a visual thing, that I could find my way around on the football field and the baseball field. It's a kind of awareness of where I am in space, and where the holes are, where the openings are. When I made all conference in high school, one of the writers for a local newspaper said I was the smartest runner in the conference. And that was a way of saying that I could see my way through. I wasn't the fastest. The guy on our team, other halfback, was like state champion in the 100-yard dash back then. But I was pretty fast, but I could move. I could move and know where I was in space. And that made it possible to find my way through. All these big guys want to beat up on me.
What that suggests, and what your whole book suggests, to be honest, is that synchronicities are always around us, moment by moment.
Well, I'm big into the sine wave, Jeff. I think the moments come and go. I think we have peaks and we have valleys. This sine wave thing, I'll go meta with you for a minute because I think you might like it. But you look at a sine wave, and you take part of it, like a peak, and it's a bell-shaped curve almost. The normal curve is a pretty good describer of a lot of parts of our reality. And then you take that sine wave and you turn it on its side and you spin it like that, and you get a helix. You get a spiral that's symmetrical, like our DNA helix. So the sine wave contains, in 3 dimensions, a lot of parts of the way our reality works. So I like that one.
Very interesting analogy. And ironically, it reminds me of I had a mentor in college, Arthur M. Young, who invented the helicopter and was also an astrologer who wrote a book called The Geometry of Meaning. And he talks about the sine wave, just as you've described it, and how the angular relationships implicit in the movement of the sine wave mirror the angular relationships of the signs of astrology and the aspects between the planets of astrology. So he derives all of astrology from that very image that you just spoke of.
Wow. That's intriguing. That's really intriguing. We got onto that because you're saying they're all present, and I'm synchronicities, and I'm saying there are moments when they're more likely. There are richer moments, and there are moments when they're really not particularly likely.
Arthur Young, as an astrologer, pointed out something called the Arabian part of coincidence. It's a very obscure astrological sign. And the Arabian part of coincidence has to do with the angular relationships in your astrology chart between Mars, Uranus, and your ascendant. And in my astrology chart, Mars and Uranus are absolutely perfectly in opposition to each other. They're on opposite sides of the sky. And Arthur Young pointed out that when the transiting planets during my life, throughout the course of my life, are in conjunction with that point in the horoscope of the opposition between Mars and Uranus, that's when the major synchronicities of my life took place.
Far out and groovy. Since you are kind of an explanatory tendency guy, what do you make out of that?
I'm totally puzzled by it. I don't know what to make of it, but it was uncanny in terms of how precise it was. He asked me, tell me the dates of the major synchronicities of your life. And he went through the chart and we examined them in detail. And he even published a little article about it for the Institute of the Study of Consciousness.
Boy, that is cool. So isn't that a form of research you're just describing, Jeff?
Well, it was, of course, retrospective. It was post hoc, after the fact. We never tried to do a prospective study on it, but the intriguing thing is that Arthur Young himself, the reason that he knew to look at the Arabian part of coincidence on my chart is because he had something similar in his own chart.
That's a coincidence right there. And that brought the two of you closer. One of the points of talking about coincidences is with each other. When you have a shared coincidence, like as you did, just having Mars and Uranus in opposition with him, that's a shared coincidence. And there are a lot of them. They happen. But you met somebody who had a shared coincidence with you astrologically. What that does and did for you and will with other people is bring you closer together. You become more respectful and intrigued by the other when you share a coincidence like that. So I'm encouraging people, when you have a coincidence with somebody and you share it, have the same thing like this, then you talk about it with each other to see what it means to each of you.
Well, you set up something called the Coincidence Cafe for that purpose, for people to come together and share their coincidences.
Yes, we did, and we're no longer doing that. It was a great experiment, and regrettably, we didn't have too many people having the same. Yes, we did. When they went into small groups, they would find. My grandfather was a clockmaker, and my father loves clocks, and they would find shared coincidences. but in the smaller groups. And that, what that does is allow people to become closer with each other because of that shared experience. And that then illustrates how coincidences connect us in ways we're not quite aware of, but can become.
Do you encourage people to keep a journal of their coincidences?
Absolutely. You can't, it's a little like dreams, Jeff. You can't remember them. And most people can't remember. I remembered most of this stuff because my brain was like, my mind is like a coincidence organizer receptor. But when Snapper happened, I mean, that was a beginning event. But it's like a dream diary. You can see patterns. And I wouldn't have seen patterns without writing this book.
Bernard Beitman, what a pleasure to be with you once again and to share your passion for synchronicities and coincidences. And in fact, I believe, now that I think of it, you're known as Dr. Coincidence.
I like to be known as Dr. Coincidence. That's the hippie part of me.
Well, what a pleasure to be with you, Bernie. Thank you so much.
It's great to connect with you, Jeff. I mean, this was really fun, getting to feel you more than I have been able to get a feeling of you in the past. It's really good. Really good.
Thank you. And for those of you watching or listening, thank you for being with us, because you are the reason that we are here.
Book 3 in the new Thinking Aloud dialogue series is UFOs and UAP, Are We Really Alone? Now available on Amazon.
New Thinking Aloud is presented by the California Institute for Human Science, a fully accredited university offering distant learning graduate degrees that focus on mind, body, and spirit. The topics that we cover here. We are particularly excited to announce new degrees emphasizing parapsychology and the paranormal. Visit their website at CIHS.edu. You can now download all 8 copies of the New Thinking Aloud magazine for free, or order beautiful printed copies. Go to newthinkingaloud.org.